I consider myself fairly modern as far as priests go. God's power manifests in minor, transcendental ways, and most matters of the earth really are of the earth. My parish is a little out of the way, just a few hundred people clustered around a minor cattle industry. Being the kind of priest I am, and having the sort of superstitious, old-fashioned flock I do, there were a few occasions where I acted as the voice of reason and secular empiricism when rumors started to circulate. When Pat Mahan half-joked that he was seeing fairies in his garden at night, just like his old grandmother had always talked about, it was me who pressed him to head into town and get himself seen to. This led to him being diagnosed with a damaged optic nerve that sent white lights flickering across his vision in the dark. I'd venture to say I was a gentle, restraining force, reminding people how rarely their ills can be linked back to the supernatural or darkly divine. This is why I was truly, genuinely surprised to find that Molly really was possessed. I knew something was wrong when her panicked mother let me into her room and I found her completely naked, sitting in front of her dresser. She had become so thin that her limbs were gangly and insect-like. Her skin was solid gray, not like she was dying, but like she was already dead. She didn't give any sign that she noticed my entrance. The room was destroyed, littered with broken perfume bottles, torn clothes, and anything you might find in a teenage girl's room, bent, broken, or shattered. She was perfectly still, looking straight ahead. I thought she must be enraptured by her own reflection, until I noticed that the dresser mirror had been shattered. "Molly?" I asked, trying to keep the fear out of my voice. I forced myself to inch towards her, reaching out my hand. My finger touched her bony shoulder, and there was an explosion of movement that made me throw myself back against the wall. When I collected myself, I saw that Molly was coiled, squatting in the corner of the room, one of the corners where the walls met the ceiling. Molly was squeezed into it like a frog, defying gravity, her face now pulled back in a rabid grimace as she hyperventilated through clenched teeth. I froze, pinned back against the far wall like a rabbit in front of a wolf. I don't know how long I was there, locked in place by the age-old instinct that when you move, the predator pounces. That endless purgatory was eventually interrupted by a deep, echoing voice that spilled out of Molly, despite her mouth remaining closed. A flood of a voice that suffocated the entire room. "Stop thinking about Christ." I began to breathe faster. "Stop thinking about Christ," came the voice again. "Well, why?" I said. "He is hope. He is salvation. He is what you would term goodness. Thoughts like that are an irritant to my kind. Never mind that the fiction of him was created to cope with the reality of us. What he embodies is toxic to my kin." It was hard to reconcile the calmness and intelligence of the voice with the frothing, hanging beast that had once been Molly. "What do you want?" I asked. "I want to hurt Molly, and I'm doing a good job." As much as this terrified me, it put the matter in no uncertain terms. I wasn't a good priest if I left. I wasn't anything I'd like to think I am. I reached for the crucifix hanging on a chain around my neck and pushed it outward toward Molly. There was a sound like a stabbed cat, and I was rocketed back, slamming against the wall so hard that plaster rained down on me. I slid up off my feet, a colossal force pressing against and around my neck, something grasping my wrist with the strength of an ape. My eyes flickered open, and the blurring cleared until I could see Molly below me, looking up with crazed, furious eyes. Her eyes darted over to the crucifix, still clenched in my hand. "You think that will help you save Molly? Let's see." She grabbed the cross from my palm. I heard a wet sizzling, and a veil of steam started enveloping her hand. She held the cross between two fingers and began dragging them across her face, leaving red, bubbling streaks on her lifeless flesh. "It's working. See? See how you're saving Molly?" "Stop, stop, please stop," I screamed before being thrown across the floor in a whacking, painful slide. A moment later, the cross clattered across the floor beside me, still steaming, deformed and melted. The moments after that are a frantic blur, but they ended with me collapsing out of the room and slamming the door closed behind me. I stood up, leaning against the wall for support, and saw Molly's mother bawling at the far end of the hall. I looked down and saw my hands, clenched into half claws and shaking uncontrollably. "The Lord is with us all," I said in a shaking voice, "but I think I'm going to need to contact some people who the Lord is more with. A lot more with." I had to wait a little while in my sitting room. I'd called my bishop, and he said he'd call someone else, and I was waiting on the result of all that. My house was fairly standard for priest accommodations. Cozy, warm, wood-paneled. Kojak, the fit German shepherd I'd inherited from the parish's previous priest, was panting anxiously at my feet, looking concerned. I indulged a bad habit I'd slipped into, sticking my fingers in the whiskey I was drinking and letting Kojak lick it off. Not enough to affect him, of course. He just seemed to like the taste. I looked at the table in front of my seat, and my eyes were drawn to the thin glass globe near its edge. The oceans fully transparent, the continents frosted. It looked very different than it had that morning. Bigger. Less easily contained in my head. Every tiny spot more mysterious than before. The phone rang and pulled me out of my thoughts. I answered straight away, desperate for some guidance. There were no introductions. The voice at the other end got straight into it. "We will arrive at Molly O'Neill's house in 1 hour. We will require your assistance and total cooperation by order of the Holy See. Please be there." I was standing outside the gate to Molly's house when the van pulled up. Not a limousine, not some fancy gleaming black affair with a chrome grille. It was a rusting white van that, now that I think of it, they had probably bought secondhand in the previous half hour so it couldn't be traced. The men who stepped out, however, looked about how I'd expected. Serious, stern, wearing the long frock-like priest clothes that I'd always thought would be more alienating than the black pants and shirt I wore. They stopped in front of me, silent for a second, as they looked me over with squinting, hard eyes. A series of crashes sounded from the window to Molly's bedroom, and we all saw a sharp elbow smash through the glass before being instantly sucked back in like paper through an airplane door. They stiffened their backs slightly, looking at the cavity. "This looks as though it constitutes a severe case," said one, a man in his 50s with well-combed orange hair. "Very severe," said the other, a younger man with thick black hair and a strong build, his face less lined but just as serious. "What do we have to do?" I asked. They both looked at me like it hadn't been my turn to speak. "In cases of genuine possession, we have a very strict system of dealing with the vessels. Just cooperate with us every step of the way," said the older one. "Vessels? We have to move it. As you may have already learned, judging by those bruises around your neck and the shakes you haven't quite settled, transporting something like this is no easy feat." Just as he said this, 2 more of Molly's limbs, and I would never be sure which 2, burst out of the windows, flailing and spinning fast enough to blur, before whipping back inside with the screech of glass dragged with them from the edges of the holes. The younger priest rapped his hand against the side of the van, and a dozen more figures spilled out, spreading themselves into a wide, staggered line and aiming lightweight machine guns at Molly's house. Machine guns that had ornate crosses in the place of sights. Molly's house was far enough up the road and away from the village that I don't think anybody saw. It was probably something the priests had made plans to prevent in any case. The figures were all dressed in shells of black, plastic-like body armor, their faces concealed by visored helmets with grilled breathing slots. No skin whatsoever was visible. Their only identifying mark was on their left shoulder plates, a gaudy, colorful quartet of boxes centered on a smaller green and gold crest, the boxes ranging from displaying simple striped designs to complex, hard-to-interpret tangles of objects and symbols. After a moment, and yes, it shouldn't have taken that long, I realized it was the symbol of the Swiss Guard. "They actually do something," I said. The two priests had withdrawn the most hefty, overworked crucifixes I'd ever seen in person. They were solid steel, only capable of being held in a full grasp, worked over in pearls and ivory, and several other obviously expensive white substances I couldn't be bothered to identify. They stormed in toward the house, crosses already held out in front of them. The guard followed, flowing after the striding priests automatically. It was in those last few seconds that I noticed something particularly troubling. One of the guards was not carrying a gun, but a thick silver collar at the end of an extendable pole. Its outside edge was covered in skinny jeweled bars, some stuck flat against the surface, others smaller ones sticking out on tiny hinges. It looked like the kind of thing you'd use to restrain a rabid dog. 10 minutes later, we were all sitting on bare iron benches in the bleak interior of the van. I was pressed between two of the guards, dense plates pressing in on me. Molly's capture and extraction had been loud, chaotic, and had required no small amount of reassurance of Molly's mother by me that it was all for the best and that her daughter would be fine. She was now at the opposite end of the passenger area, toward the driver's compartment, pinned to the corner by the outstretched crosses of the priests and the aimed cross sights of a few of the guards. The dog catcher analog had been closed around her neck, held from a distance by another of the guards. She moaned and squealed pitifully in what I judged to be fear and pain. Twice she attempted to leap forward toward the door, but each time the guard with the dog catcher would press a button on the pole. The smaller hinged bars on the collar would snap down over the larger ones, forming crosses. Waves of steam and smoke would cascade out over the silver as the smell and sound of sizzling meat swelled. Her throat would bubble and blister, crumple and boil down to a red swamp before she would instantly collapse back to where she had been, screaming before the crosses were parted and the sizzling subsided. In the aftermath, she would moan and squeal even more than she had before. How did your crosses stop her? Mine didn't. The two priests looked back at me. The older one answered, "Yours was probably made in a warehouse in Mongolia where child laborers try not to burn themselves with molten steel. These ones have been blessed by every pope of the last 400 years, in full view of at least 12 archbishops, and then paraded in view of the faithful during papal visits. They are of a higher and meticulously tendered class of holiness." "You fucking children," came Molly's voice. It wasn't the overbearing voice that had previously come from Molly. It was a weak, crackling sound spoken with her mouth. The words were saturated with pain, screechy and drawn out. "You idiots. It's not holy. It's all your delusion being dumped onto those objects. All your hope and desperation and love. Ideas about salvation. The arrogance of thinking that it's all on your side, and the universe was made by a kind, guiding old man. You dump it onto the Pope, like a waterfall of acid, and he soaks it up and dumps it onto those crosses, only because people believe he can, because they give him permission to channel their poison. He dumps it, and he's helped out by all the archbishops you called them, and all those people at your parades and visits. So many people caught in the tamest level of hell and hoping for better. All their thoughts, unnatural thoughts, thoughts that could only exist in the epiderm, they get sprayed out and shower those fucking crosses." The pain in the voice started to fade away, replaced by growling malice. "You think that means you're right about God, about Christ, about divinity, but you're wrong. It's proof of how wrong those notions are. That the existence of them, their mere presence, is so scalding and wrong and impossible that it's death to us, to almost all life. Those ideas are eldritch and incomprehensible to anything from outside of the cold half-world of the epiderm. They are aberrations, warped perversions possible only in your dark sliver of the universe. Perhaps I do not explain well enough. The universe is..." The screaming came again. The guard handling the dog catcher had triggered it, standing up out of his seat. "Shut up!" he bellowed. "Shut up, you monster! Monster!" I tried to stand up and stop him, but was pulled back down by the guards beside me. A moment later, I saw the younger priest surge forward, sending the hysteric guard's armored head clanging into the iron wall with his elbow before wrenching the pole from his hands and releasing the hinges. Another guard rose to drag the now dazed man back away from Molly, still pinned down by the older priest's outstretched cross. "Do not speak again, aberration," said the younger priest. "Speak again, and we burn you to the bone." "Over my dead body," I shouted from behind. Several guns snapped up to aim at me, and the old priest met my gaze. It quickly became apparent that my dead body was not as much of a moral obstacle as I'd thought it was. After another hour, the van slowed down, stopping a few times and picking up a little speed before stopping one final time. The older priest led me and most of the guards from the dim interior into washed-out daylight. We were on a windy concrete landing field, about 20 feet from a plane. The guards spread out, creating an aisle. Molly was carried by 2 guards, wrapped in a brown sheet of canvas. The young priest still held onto the pole that stuck out of the sheet's tattered folds. She began to shake and convulse in their struggling grips before the young priest flicked the collar switch on and off a few times, eliciting muffled screams from behind the ball gag they'd put on Molly, sending her into one last massive spasm that almost lifted the guards off their feet before she went limp again. They recovered themselves and jogged quickly up the unfolded stairs into the plane. We were soon in the air. I'd been instructed to sit in the forward passenger compartment. I'd caught a glimpse of the section behind as they'd carried Molly through. A bare metal hangar, like a larger version of the cold back of the van. I was there for a long time, not liking the sounds I could hear coming from behind me. Eventually they subsided. I felt alone in the forward compartment, the only other person a Swiss guard, standing stiffly at attention and refusing to answer my questions. A dusty whispering built up in my head, barely perceptible at first but intensifying until it was louder than the howling of the aircraft engines. The guard gave no indication of hearing anything. "You are nervous, little liar," came a voice like an animal scratching across dead leaves. I must have startled, because the Swiss guard standing off to the side looked at me and asked, in a voice made distant by the rushing whispers that slid through my skull, if I was experiencing anything unusual. I instinctually said no, and the guard reluctantly turned away from me. Skittish, pliant, toothless, not even the spine or conviction to be a good carrier of the plague they filled you with. The only way I could imagine responding was with my own thought. "Hello? Hello? Is this you? Is this the demon?" "No, little liar, it's the gay thoughts again. That's a strange joke for something like you to make. Molly O'Neill, the real original Molly O'Neill, is a little ball of pain and fear in the palm of my hand, coiling and wriggling and pissing herself. I know what she knows. I remember what she remembers. And I know what she thought of you. As she saw it, nobody your age becomes a priest nowadays, not unless they're running from something. Just let her go. She's innocent. She did nothing to deserve this. You believe that things should happen to beings based on whether you like what they did previously? I wasn't lied to. The creatures of the epiderm are bizarre things. What's the epiderm? What's hell? That's where you're from. It's what you call the place I come from. The epiderm is what I call the place you come from. Aren't you supposed to not respond to me? Gird your soul against the darkness and all that? I can't say I took his advice, so much as I couldn't think of anything to say, so a silence took over. "Speaking of things Molly remembers," came the voice, slipping through the brief, tense silence that descended. "Did you hear the one about your mother sucking cocks in hell? Leave me alone, demon." "It was just a joke," said the voice. "There are no cocks in hell." "Why me? Why is it me you're talking to? You're being the most interesting, at least on the inside. You're the one with the least belief. Everyone else, their faith is a burning inferno. Yours is a numb, passionless mass right at the base of your mind. They're all sure of themselves, sure of who they are and what they're for. But you're so lost and filled with repressed doubt that you'd have a pleasant little conversation with a demon on your way to an exorcism. I don't blame you. They're not doing much to make you feel like part of the team. Have they even told you where we're going? You're wrong. I swore an oath to serve Jesus Christ in all my thoughts and actions. I did not take it lightly, and it is not a decision for which I feel doubt. There was a brief lull, where I fancied for a moment that I'd put the beast in its place. Then, all in an instant, curiosity and dread defeated me. Where are we going? Cruel, dry laughter swept through my mind. The big city. What followed was the plane coming down in an empty landing field, the bundling and forcing of Molly into another black van in much better repair than the last, and an hour's driving. After a short time, the van slowed to a crawl. After another few minutes, it stopped completely. The van doors were opened from the outside by more of the armored Swiss guard. There was far less secrecy and concealment now. The guards dragged me out of the vehicle with them, and the final guard dragged Molly out last, flanked by the two priests. I looked around, finding myself in a lifeless cobbled plaza, flanked on all sides by a multi-tiered stone building, carved into sinuous, flowing lines curving around windows that flared elegantly at each end. "Where are we?" I asked. "It is off the tourist trail," said the older priest, still looming over Molly's pitiful, crawling form with his gaudy cross. But I would have thought any priest could be trusted to know when they are in the Vatican. We entered the building, now surrounded by at least 20 of the black-armored Swiss guard. The hallways were carved stone just like the outside, with arched ceilings and black-tiled floors. The only sounds were our wave of footsteps and the echoing, wretched shrieks of Molly as she was dragged across the floor by a guard. I walked beside the young priest. There seems to be some gap between the personality of the demon and how Molly is acting," I said, speaking up to be heard over Molly's desperate, unintelligible protests. "The demon is usually calm enough, or so it seems to me, but she's always screaming." The young priest looked at me across his shoulder, acknowledging me for the first time in a long time. The mechanics of possession are not fully understood. As far as we know, the emotions of the victim can come through in physical behavior, while the demon has a sort of override control. The demon can make anything happen, but the soul of the victim, which is experiencing great torment, will often retain physical control on a moment-to-moment basis, regularly including an ability to do things they wouldn't have previously been able to do, both by co-opting demonic power and making use of physical alterations to the body, wrought either consciously or unconsciously by the entity. So, regretfully, a lot of that pain we're hearing, possibly the large majority of it, is her pain. That sounds like something straight out of a textbook. The priest kept striding forward, looking dead ahead. "There isn't a textbook, is there?" "Was that from the textbook?" The priest continued to look ahead. "My God, have you ever done this before?" He didn't answer for a few seconds before finally deciding not to ignore me. "He has," he said, nodding curtly across the hallway toward the other priest. "A lot?" "Once." I became dizzy for a second, suddenly feeling whatever slight sense of security I'd had being snatched out from under me. "Was it? Successful?" "Yes." "So the victim, they survived?" "No." I didn't ask any more questions after that. We started descending a shadowy stairway, emerging into an underground library, dusty and filled with ancient leather books. The only light came from flickering yellow wall lamps, shell-like in shape and providing nowhere near enough light to read. Each compartment and section of the library was separated by brass grills that the guards yanked roughly aside with a scraping metallic sound, like they were fighting against a lot of rust and disrepair. We descended another stairwell and passed through another level of libraries, these ones containing books that were more tattered and frayed, the air sterile, and the shattered wall lights cold and dark. Beneath that level, there were no more open spaces. Lit by torches slung underneath the Swiss Guards' guns, we descended into a warren of arched tunnels made of ancient stone blocks, cracked and bulging out at odd angles. As we progressed, I began to hear something over the ululating echoes of Molly's screams, similar enough that it could have been there a long time without me noticing. It was deeper, with a gargling, throaty quality, and where Molly sounded like a monstrous parody of a teenage girl being tormented, this sounded like a similar corruption of 10,000 people suffering and despairing as one, like the synchronized slaughter of 1,000,000 cancer-ridden cattle. It was still distant now, but I slowed down a moment as I had to wonder, would I be able to tolerate that sound if it got any louder? It felt like if that happened, if God forbid it came to be as loud and as close as Molly was then, my soul might flee my body just to get away from it. The older priest seemed to notice this, crossing across the hallway to clasp my shoulder, both to comfort me and make sure I kept walking. I know what you're feeling, my brother in Christ. We all feel it. But if you'll look to your training and studies, I believe you will remember that even the valley of death has its saving graces. Thank you. I will bear that in mind, I mumbled, trying to compose myself. I decided he needn't know that I only remembered that passage from Pulp Fiction. In any case, it was hard to fully appreciate the gesture while I was watching a girl I had known and watched over for years as she was dragged naked and screaming through what looked to be a medieval torture dungeon. We began to pass rusty iron doors inset in the walls. We kept walking for a long time, the older priest's firm grip keeping me moving. The distant sound got louder and louder. I thanked God for every lull, before physically shaking as a new wave of howling crashed down the stone corridors. After what felt like an endless march, the 1,000 voices had become so loud that they drowned Molly out. My knees had become weak and shaky, my body drenched with sweat as my heart hammered at triple pace against my chest. And all in an instant it cut off, the howling collapsing into perfect silence. The older priest raised a hand and the holy convoy froze, moving into defensive positions. I saw that we were in a hallway that led down to a single door at its end, identical to every other door we had passed in the maze of tunnels. The older priest turned to me. If we need your help, it will be soon. You need to understand what we are doing here. I forced myself to nod, still recovering from the howling, still afraid of it returning. Exorcisms do not work as you imagine. You can't just force out a demon and expect it to tumble back down to hell. You've just forced it out and left it with free rein to possess anyone and everyone. That's why we developed a system. A system? In France, sometime in the early 16th century, there was an incident, completely unprecedented in our records. A number of demons, 5 we think, entered the world around the same area, and by chance or coordination, possessed the same person. The results were abominable. Several villages were destroyed before we managed to suppress it and transport it here. This was unbelievable. Back then, as now, possession was very rare. The church had long had a policy of incarcerating victims, and still had only a handful in custody at any given time. So what we had was one person already suffering under 5 of the fallen. Somebody made a proposal that must have seemed as insane then as it does now, but it was attempted. Force the spirits from one vessel into another. Force them out as we had, but not into the world, into another vessel. I leaned back against the wall, my throat tightening as I began to understand, the context for the sound I'd been hearing making it so much worse. It worked. The possessed did not survive most of the time. If they did, they rarely lived well, but we could at least put them out of their misery, pile all of it on one, and make the spirits easier to monitor by centralizing them. It meant we could truly exorcise one person without the spirit being able to move on to a new victim beyond our grasp. The results were successful, but disturbing. What about Molly? She has a chance, surely. You know what you're doing. She has a chance. His expression changed a little, displaying just a tinge of regret. "She has a chance. In any case, we need you there. It's sometimes useful to have a familiar face, someone the victim recognizes." So, for about 500 years the church has been transferring the demons from every possessed person they find into one body? Yes, it's called. They call themselves. It's called Pan. How many are in there? We have about 1,100 on record. It slowed to a trickle in the last century or two. We'd like to think it's because people are becoming possessed less often, but strong odds are it's a combination of decreased church power and the demons becoming better at hiding from us. If anything, whatever's in Molly must be a particularly witless servant of darkness. "I'm wounded," said Molly. "Oh wait, that's her cunt." I swallowed spit to wet my bone-dry throat. Is the original person, the person from France, are they still in there? If they are, then God help them. God help them more than anyone who has ever lived. The older priest walked toward the door, signaling everyone else to follow. He and the younger priest approached the door, and even they hesitated before swinging it open on tortured hinges. I followed them in, cold lead weighing down in my gut. The room inside was brightly lit by gently flickering fluorescent lights hanging from the ceiling in old, warped protective cages. The room was a perfect square, and as I write all this, I realize that I'm just putting off having to describe what sat, motionless and slumped over, in the center of the room. Its skin was smooth, glistening pink all over, like the sensitive, healing skin that forms over a bad burn. Its frame was emaciated, its skeleton warped and overgrown. It surely would have been at least 7 feet standing up. It had no face, or nothing that could be called a face anymore. Its eye sockets were sunken depressions covered in the same raw skin that stretched over the rest of its frame. It had a mouth, lipless, the top and bottom connected by thick, fleshy tendons, stretched taut even when its mouth was only half open. The worst part was the bones. Its collarbones emerged into the open air like bony ridges on a pink landscape. Its spine extended up from its bent back like a yellow mountain range, and 6 dead straight horns emerged like a crown from its scalp. After a breathless moment, fighting my urge to bolt and run and fall apart, I noticed the strange texture of the bone, how riddled it was with holes, and how strange the holes looked. My mind resolved what I was seeing all in one sickening instant. The bones were buildings. The collarbones were stepped levels of little houses built into the bone, like Machu Picchu. Each jutting vertebra was a tiered palace, like something out of a Bible illustration, and the horns were like Renaissance towers, slender and fluted, ringed with elegant geometric openings. And in the openings, the would-be windows and door frames, black wispy things slithered and wrapped around each other, some twisting in the recesses, some straining against the openings, held within by some unseen barrier. I vomited down my shirt. Whether that was out of fear or disgust, I'm still not quite sure. After another dazed moment, I realized that the thing was ringed with tall golden crosses, and it took me another moment to recognize them. Following my eye line, the older priest whispered to me, "As far as the public knows, every pope uses one pastoral staff. This is a lie. We make 13 identical ones, parade them in front of the faithful to strengthen their anti-demonic properties, and at any given time, 12 are employed here." The 2 priests moved into the ring of staffs rising up from the floor. Most of the Swiss guards spread out throughout the room, guns aimed down but stances ready and defensive. 3 of the guard were putting all their strength into dragging a screaming, senseless Molly across the floor. Her screams had become so piercing it was painful, and she was so desperate to distance herself from the ring of crosses that she wasn't deterred in the least by the crosses being snapped together around the rim of her collar. "Jesus fucking Christ!" I shouted as she was pushed past the threshold. The skin down each of her sides, down the full length of her body, began to burn and blister and sizzle with dripping fat. "It's the only way," announced the old priest. I followed them into the ring. The 3 guards had forced the wailing Molly to her knees in front of Pan. "How?" I asked. "How do you do it?" The young priest answered this time. "There's no special words, no particular incantation. We've got it in a ring it can't escape from. Now we burn it out of the one toward the other." The 2 priests simultaneously pressed their crosses against one of the increasingly rare unburned parts of Molly's body, the center of her back. She screamed worse than ever before, and I began to hear a bizarre crackling sound. My stomach flipped again as I saw its source. Molly was elongating away from the crosses. Held in place by 3 straining guards, it was like her body was trying to grow away from the source of her pain. The center of her chest yawned outward into a massive mound. Her mouth inched forward into a muzzle, gums and sharpening fangs tearing out and leaving tattered lips behind. Oh, holy fucking Christ. It was at this point that Pan apparently woke up. It launched up toward the ceiling, up off its chair to strain against the chains that kept it down. The lights flashed off and on spastically. The room shook and quaked. No, it wasn't just the room. It was like the air, my insides, and space itself had a blurred, insane seizure, where all sense and thought was lost in madness down to the molecular level. I voided my bladder, my bowels, and my stomach. And then I saw Molly, or what had been her, whip around, almost throwing her handlers off their feet. Something black and gaseous and brimming with hate and energy screamed toward me, impacting like a giant hammer and throwing me backward. And then there was darkness. There was darkness for a long time, but then there was light, faint and growing quickly, forming a tapered oval halo. Let me tell you something, little liar. Liar to himself and to others. Let me tell you the way of things, the way of what you've always wanted to understand, what you always feared an understanding of. There is all, everything that ever was and ever will be, the sum of all existence. And it is a black egg. What is this? What's happening? You're the demon who had Molly. You've escaped into me. Yes, but never mind that. You're going to learn something. I'm going to teach you because you're such an interesting little liar. The egg's halo glowed a little brighter. Existence is a black egg. The shell is cold. It is slow and stable and quiet. Slow little things live there and have slow little thoughts. And there is order there. The word is strange for me to speak, so foreign. Things make sense to the beings within. There are laws, rules, things are painfully consistent. But inside the egg, inside the black egg, there is red. I felt myself whipped forward into the egg in a rush of changing pressure. I slowed and found myself in a scarlet nightmare. Red liquid stretching like a bloody ocean in every direction. Strange currents slashed and surged inexplicably in all dimensions. There were structures there, stretching infinitely up, stretching infinitely down, flaring and narrowing, huge black structures made from shiny bulbs, all held together by hardened ooze. The individual swollen bulbs deformed each other, as if they had grown together in competition, some bending and curving around others. Cavities gaped in the swollen sections of the black organic columns, and things flowed in and out of them, bulbous things, composed of smaller, clustered black bladders like frog spawn. They stretched to a point at either end, their surface bristled with rhythmically waving, multi-jointed, thousand-fingered arms and legs that lengthened and shortened impossibly. Some of these were caught and swept along by the insane currents of the vast red ocean. In the red, came the demon's voice again. In the red there is no order, no rules. It is a living place, a warm place, where things flow as they will, and the things that grow here, the life that thrives, they think nothing of salvation. That last word had come out strange, like it had sizzled and disintegrated as soon as it had been voiced in such an inhospitable environment. Nothing of hope. That word boiled and simmered just like the last, or goodness. That word screamed and was swept away almost before it could be heard. Because the red is almost all of it. There is so much more inside the egg than that thin shell that surrounds it. And the things that grow and live there understand this. They understand what existence is. A red place of pain and madness where all things eat all things. Sometimes they abandon their hard forms. As the voice said this, one of the bulbous creatures popped, rupturing to emit a large black cloud that surged up and away in an instant. They abandon their hard forms, go soft and float up to the epiderm, for their hard forms would be too heavy and cumbersome to pull through the barrier. And sometimes they enter the hard forms of the things that live up there, the simple, slow things, the stupid things that imagine there is something better beyond the egg. I began to see something new. Little white wisps darting back and forth through the endless red. They moved furtively in fits and starts, like they were scared, like they didn't know where to go. And when, in the epiderm, hard forms fail, the things that live there, their soft forms drift down, all the way down into the red. A number of the black bulbous creatures began to surround one of the little wispy things, penning it in and scaring it so it didn't dare dart out. And the creatures of the red do not share in the delusions held by the creatures of the black. One of the black creatures extended 2 of its arms and interlocked its 1,000 fingers into a lattice around the white wisp. The white wisp began to shake and vibrate and struggle against the fingers, trapped. I could see black sphincters between where all the fingers stemmed from, in the black thing's palms. You see that one? That's your mother. The sphincters yawned open, and fronds of narrow, questing tendrils poured out before seeming to sniff out the white thing, at which point they began lashing toward it. They dug deep into the desperate, thrashing and quivering white thing that began to turn gray, the grayness spreading, crawling across and down into the white thing from the countless points the tendrils were penetrating it. The white and gray thing became more desperate, throwing itself pointlessly against the fingers. Its protests started to become weaker and weaker. As if from an enormous distance I thought I heard screaming. There are worse things than cocks in hell. All in an instant I was whipped back, across immense distances at terrifying speed, and in a moment of collision, I woke into my spasming body. I screamed at a wave of squeezing and burning that bloomed down my right side. As I looked up, I saw the old priest and young priest alike, bearing down on me with their crucifixes. 2 Swiss guards were holding me down, putting all their weight on me, but somehow, impossibly, one free hand was stretched out, pulling me along against my will, bit by bit, toward the edge of the ring of papal staffs. I could feel it inside me, an immense and dripping black presence pressing out from the back of my head, flattening my entire self and mind and soul against my throbbing eyes. In a moment, all that I had seen, all that the demon had shown me, crystallized, the full weight of it hitting me. But it didn't break me. My mind lashed out against it, going mad with denial, with the need to believe that it was wrong, that there was something else, something outside the egg. From the front of my skull, I pushed back at the bile, pressing it forward, just as I forced my will back into my limbs and launched myself up with a strength that wasn't mine, tossing the guards, pinning me down away and out through the ring. Pan was still awake, crashing up and down, into and out of its seat in the strobing light. The black, smoke-like masses in its bone cities swelled against whatever force held them inside. I snatched one of the crosses from out of the younger priest's hands, feeling my skin turn to lava around it. I held it up in front of my chest, weathering the agony that cascaded over me as I screamed. Jesus Christ is the one true Savior, Son of the one true God, and He is outside the fucking egg. I felt myself pulled around, a thunderclap sounding all around me as I slammed into the ground. Something black and gaseous rocketed out between 2 papal staffs, bending them with its passage before hitting the wall with a deafening slap and vanishing, leaving behind a crumbling crater. All the crosses stopped burning me so much, and at last, mercifully, I passed out. They didn't explain a lot during my brief period of physical and mental recovery in the Vatican. Only what I needed to know. The exorcism had been a failure. The demon was at large. This was rare, but not unprecedented. Molly's mother would be kept quiet. The story was, Molly had drowned herself. I had performed admirably. I was to return to my parish, which at last I did, feeling nothing but hollow and numb. At least the burns had mostly healed. As I closed my front door behind me and turned into the sitting room, I paused a second, so completely unable to identify what I was seeing that there was a delay before I vomited, again, on yet another shirt. There was a mass of gore sitting on my armchair, a senseless fusion of rearing bone, stretched, raw meat, and occasional bulges covered in black, blood-matted fur. It had limbs, two crossed over the edge of the chair, one resting on one of the chair's arms, one holding a glass of whiskey and a dripping claw of exposed sinew and distorted bone. It was only when I looked between the thing's legs that I figured out more or less what it was. I saw Kojak's skinned and now misshapen head, jaws open wide and separated by a number of sharp teeth that had stretched down and fused together, like the joining of stalagmites and stalactites in a cave. And the tongue, the lolling, twitching tongue, there's really no way to say it besides this. It had become a human penis while retaining its original texture. I made a weak, grating sound, my mind blank. The limb holding the whiskey lifted it up, pouring some down a stretched, gaping cavity at the opposite end from Kojak's flayed head. It would take me a long time to figure out that this hole was the gaping ruin of Kojak's anus. I should say, came the flooding, suffocating voice of the demon, that all this, at least, was not intentional. Before coming to the epiderm, I learned how to inhabit human hard forms. When you use the same principles to try and enter a dog, things can get messy. Get out, I said in a wavering voice. I banished you once. Get out. As if I didn't want to leave that dark hole the liars brought me to. In any case, this whiskey doesn't seem to be working. Doesn't really taste of anything. I banished you. Again, I let myself out. Oh, but you got into quite a frenzy, didn't you? The mass of meat stood up, placing one arm behind its back and holding the whiskey high as it walked, as if deep in thought. I kept moving around to keep the distance between us, but it wasn't trying to walk toward me specifically. Its footsteps were tiny, wet sounds, and the puddles of blood they left behind would quickly drag forward of their own volition, attempting to rejoin the main mass. You were so spooked, you became a good true liar for just a bit, and screamed the name of your God with such conviction, because in that moment, with the memory of the red so fresh in your mind, you couldn't bear to believe in anything else. The meat stopped, turning as if to look at me. But it's been a while, and the fires burned down to embers, and you don't believe like you did in that moment, no matter what you tell yourself. You've almost gone back to how you were before it all. I can feel it in you. You're wrong. Jesus Christ is... We both know I'm not wrong, so shut up about it. So tell me, you've had a little bit of an arc, had a few moments of the certainty you'd always looked for, but have you finally realized? Has the whole thing given you the context to understand why you joined the liars in the first place? I can see it plain as day, but in all those weeks recovering, have you pieced it together? I took a deep breath, swallowed, and answered. Because all my life I was scared. Scared that we, the whole world, everyone together didn't understand anything. That the universe was so big and death was so long and we had so few answers about any of them. So I started pretending, or deluding myself into thinking, I believed one thing. The thing I was brought up with. I kept telling myself that I believed it because the thought was so much more comfortable and safe than admitting how impossible it was to know the truth, that the kind of things you showed me, or a million other horrible, hopeless things, could be the truth. And I needed to believe so badly I did everything to play to the fiction, all the way up to devoting my life to what I was trying to convince myself wasn't a lie. The demon snickered lightly in what almost seemed a friendly way. Well, now that you've figured it out, you aren't so fun to watch anymore. The meat began to walk again straight toward a wall and up it, casually mocking nature as it continued its stroll up the walls, across scenic paintings, and finally stopping to stand, hanging from the center of the ceiling, directly above the glass globe. The whiskey stayed in the glass. Just one more thing, one more little spook of a thought. You know now what the epiderm is, how thin it is, how fragile. And you have beings of chaos and destruction at large in it, and you concentrate them all on one pinprick of a point, all that instability and pressure bearing down on one minuscule piece. My eyes started to tear up, and I was overtaken by a wave of shivering as I started to piece together where the demon was going. If you keep pushing and trying to put more and more pressure on that one little part of the shell, the spot already so saturated it's getting difficult to add anything more to. If you force that tiny, extra bit of stress on such a thin, fragile shell, well, what do you think might happen? The meat went limp and dropped from the ceiling, smashing the glass globe into a million pieces.